Hello guys, and welcome back to the channel. So this is the video guide that most of you have been waiting for. And I know you guys are asking for other build guides. Don't worry, I'll make them, but one step at a time. So in this video, I'm going to share with you my opinion builds and some of my favorite builds. And also keep in mind that we're not finalizing anything here, okay? I'm just giving you my best opinion as much as I can. So that said, let's go on with our first build. My first build is pretty simple, and I call this build the Vampire Blade build. By the way guys, your solo digger will be this guy, Zhang Wei, alright? So if you want to use this build to solo dig, this is your man. Okay, so the role of this build is to maximize your lifesteal, to increase your sustainability in battle. And for those who's curious if this build can do solo Hell 2, then no, I don't think it can. I mean, I haven't tried it myself, so I'm not so sure. But other than that, it's a pretty solid build. And if you haven't tried this build yet, then I suggest that you try it. It may not be an all-rounder build, but it's as good as it can get. So that's it for this build, and on our next build we have this one. It's a slight variation of the Vampire Blade build, but only we replace the Leech Sword with the dual axe. So I call this build the Rage Blade build, simply because I gain rage much faster, lol. So anyways, the purpose of this build is to get rage as often as possible, so that you can use your skill more frequently. And yes, you can use this build to solo dig with Zhang Wei, but as always, avoid the lions. Next we have the Killer Blade build. So on this build we have the Leech Sword as our core item for smelting. And if you didn't get Leech Sword in your institute, then forget about this build. So anyways, the Flying Guillotine is really good with the Longsword soldier. This is because of their skill, the Whirlwind, which adds bleed effect. At level 6, the bleed causes 70% bleed dump damage on the enemy per turn, lasting for 3 turns. Also, it reduces enemies' HP regen by 20%. This build is one of the most dangerous build of the Longsword, given that you get all stats to higher, like getting 20% on Flying Guillotine, 50% on Leech Sword, and so on. But if you can't get 18% stats on your Flying Guillotine or lower, then forget about this build, because this build really shines when your Flying Guillotine is at max than 20% stats. And as for solo digging, this build can do solo dig, just avoid the lions. So that's it for this build. Now let's go on to our next build. On our next build, we have the Hook Sword as our core item for smelting, paired with Crit Blade, Battle Axe, and Circle Sword. And I call this build the Hookiebookie Blade build next to the Kabuki Warrior because it reminds me of them, lol. This build is rather an unusual build for the Longsword, and it works best if your hero has a +1 attack range to pair with this build. Personally, I won't recommend this build if your hero has no +1 attack range, because this build won't be that effective. That said, the purpose of this build is to snipe the enemy from a distance while keeping it safe, hiding behind your ally tank. But that is, if you have +1 attack range from your hero, otherwise forget about this build. So that's for this Hookiebookie Blade build. Next on our build lists is, well, I call this one the Unreal Blade build, because most of you would disagree on this build, but let me explain. Do you know this guy's ability? Well, Zhang Wei's ability is similar to the Mirror Armor. It says here, each time Whirlwind is released, gain 4 attack and 6% damage reduction, and its max stack is 10. But that's not the only reason why I choose Lameller as its core item, but this build also works on Lu Meng as well. So let me explain this build as to why I choose the Lameller as core item for smelting. My first reason is the Longsword skill, the Whirlwind. Since the Whirlwind is AoE, then I thought why not put Lameller along with the Battle Axe and Circle Blade for lifesteal. I know you need rage in order to use skill, but if your reasoning is Longsword is as good as dead versus the Bowman, then it's more the reason to add the Lameller armor to the Longswords, because this way you'll have a chance to save your other soldier by tanking all the damage. And if you happen to survive, then you have the Battle Axe and Circle Blade for your lifesteal. But this build isn't without its weakness. Remember, the game didn't design something to be immortal, if you know what I mean. So that's it for this build, and I'm really looking forward to try this build someday in one of my games. Next we have the slightly similar to the Unreal Blade build, but this time it's more acceptable. I call this build the Umbrella Man build. So we replace the Lameller with the Umbrella with this build, and this one has more damage than the Unreal Blade build because of the Umbrella effect. So this build is more of a balanced build than the rest of the build, because of the Umbrella's 15% attack and defense stats. And yes, you can definitely solo dig with this build as well. So moving on to our next second to the last build we have. Well, this one is the very commonly used build, which I'll just call it the Common Blade build. So we have Leech Sword as our core item for smelting, paired with Crit Blade, Golden Axe, and Battle Axe. So this build works best for Lu Meng because of the Leech Sword and Golden Axe working in tandem to reduce enemy damage due to shield. Additionally, Lu Meng's ability is also to add shield to itself when casting his skill, so this build really suits Lu Meng. And finally, we're on to our last build, for now. And this last build goes for Jiang Wei, and I named this build the Blade of Unstoppable Carnage of Jiang Wei build. I made the name exaggerated because the build itself doesn't look that exaggerated. So for our core item, we have the Rattan Shield paired with Crit Blade, Circle Blade, and Battle Axe. Remember guys, this build is exclusively for Jiang Wei, so the reason for this build is, remember Jiang Wei has an ability similar to Mirror Armor, right? So I just thought, why not add the Rattan to increase its overall defense? So that's where I come up with this build exclusively for Jiang Wei. So that's all for this video guys, thank you for watching and I'll see you on the next.